Before we start, kindly subscribe to my channel and tell me, where in the universe are you watching from? Commander Ronan Voss woke up to the cold bite of metal cuffs around his wrists. His head throbbed, and the dim violet lights above cast eerie shadows on the walls. The last thing he remembered was his ship being ambushed. Flashes of enemy fire, alarms blaring, and then darkness. Now he was here, a prisoner. Two towering guards, clad in sleek, black armor, hauled him forward through a grand hallway. Strange symbols glowed on the walls, pulsing like a living heartbeat. Ronan clenched his jaw. He had been in enemy hands before, but this felt different. This was no ordinary prison cell. The guards shoved him into an enormous throne room. Golden pillars stretched toward a ceiling so high it seemed endless. At the center of the room stood a throne carved from a dark, shimmering stone, its edges glowing faintly with a blue light. And seated upon it was her, the queen of the Selari Dominion. She was motionless, her presence filling the room with something both regal and dangerous. Ronan had heard of her. The Selari were a powerful ancient race that viewed humans as nothing more than reckless wanderers of the stars. And their queen. She was said to be ruthless, cold, untouchable. One of the guards slammed a fist to his chest in salute. Supreme Queen Zithara, the human has been captured as ordered. Ronan exhaled sharply, straightening his back. He wouldn't kneel. Zithara's gaze swept over him, her voice calm yet filled with quiet authority. You are the leader of the human fleet. Ronan met her eyes without hesitation. I am a commander, nothing more. A flicker of something unreadable passed over her face. Your kind trespassed into Selari territory. You attacked one of our outposts. Ronan huffed a breath. That's a lie. We were scouting unclaimed space. Your people fired first. Murmurs echoed through the court. The guards stiffened, their hands twitching near their weapons. No one spoke to the queen this way. Yet Zithara didn't order his execution. Instead, she rose from her throne and descended the steps, stopping only inches away from him. The air between them was thick with tension. Do you fear me, human? She asked softly. Ronan's lips curled into a smirk. Should I? A sharp gasp came from the court. The guards tensed, but Ronan wasn't paying attention to them, only to the queen. He wasn't sure why, but something told him she was more than just the ruler of an empire. There was something deeper beneath her icy exterior. Zithara's expression remained unreadable, but then she did something unexpected. She reached forward. A single finger traced lightly against Ronan's jaw. Instantly, the entire court erupted in horrified whispers. The guards took a step back, their glowing weapons flickering as if uncertain. Ronan barely had time to process what happened before Zithara jerked her hand away as if burned. Her eyes widened, just for a fraction of a second, before she hid it behind an impassive mask. She turned sharply. Take him to the lower chambers. I will question him myself. The guards hesitated, clearly disturbed, but obeyed. As they dragged Ronan away, he glanced back, catching one last look at the queen. For the first time since entering the throne room, she seemed shaken. And that made Ronan smile. He had just done something no one else in the galaxy had dared to do. He had touched the untouchable queen. Ronan Voss sat in the dimly lit chamber, his hands still bound in the strange metallic cuffs. The air smelled faintly of something unfamiliar, like the mixture of energy and ancient stone. He wasn't sure how long he had been sitting there, but he could still feel the lingering sensation of her touch. The Selari queen had touched him, and the way the entire court reacted, it was as if he had committed some great offense simply by existing in her presence. But he hadn't missed the flicker in her eyes, the moment of hesitation. Something had shocked her. The heavy doors slid open with a soft hum. Ronan tensed, expecting guards, but instead, she stepped inside. Queen Zithara. She moved with quiet elegance, her presence commanding the room without a single word. The doors shut behind her, leaving them alone. There were no guards this time, no watching eyes. Ronan smirked. "Didn't expect you to visit me so soon, Your Majesty." Zithara didn't react to his teasing. She stopped a few steps away from him, studying him with an unreadable expression. "What are you?" The question caught him off guard. "Last I checked, still human." She frowned slightly. "You do not understand. The moment I touched you, something happened." Ronan leaned back against the cold wall. "Yeah, I noticed. Your people looked ready to tear me apart for it." Zithara's eyes narrowed. "Xilare do not touch outsiders. It is forbidden. Our kind shares physical contact only in rare circumstances. Yet," she cut herself off, as if speaking further was dangerous. Ronan raised an eyebrow. "Yet you touched me." Silence stretched between them. Zithara's hands were clenched at her sides, her composed exterior cracking just slightly. She was trying to understand just as much as he was. Finally, she stepped forward. Ronan expected another question, perhaps even a warning, but instead, she reached out again. This time, she placed her palm against his chest. A jolt shot through them both. Not painful, not frightening, but powerful. It was as if some invisible energy awakened in the space between them, crackling like a silent storm. Zithara gasped and pulled her hand back, staring at her own fingers as if they had betrayed her. Ronan let out a breath. "Okay, that's new." She turned away sharply, pacing the chamber. It was the first time Ronan had seen her unsettled. This should not be possible. Ronan tilted his head. "Then maybe your people don't know everything they think they do." She snapped her gaze back to him. "You do not understand, human. If the High Council learns of this, they will demand your execution. They will see it as a threat to our entire way of life." Ronan frowned. "So, what? You're here to decide if I live or die?" Zithara hesitated. It was only for a second, but Ronan saw it, the doubt, the conflict. Then she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "No, I am here because I need to understand why this is happening." For the first time, there was something other than authority in her voice, something closer to curiosity. Maybe even fear. Ronan met her gaze and smirked. "Guess that means I'm staying alive a little longer." Zithara didn't answer, but she didn't deny it either. Instead, she turned sharply and walked toward the door. Just before leaving, she stopped. Without looking back, she spoke in a quieter voice. "You are not like the others, Ronan Voss." Then she was gone. And Ronan, alone in the quiet chamber, couldn't help but wonder what had just begun. Ronan sat on the cold metallic bench in his dimly lit chamber, staring at the ceiling. His mind replayed what had just happened. She touched him again. And this time, it wasn't an accident. He could still feel it, that strange, electric sensation crackling through his chest when Queen Zithara placed her hand on him. It wasn't just skin against skin. It was something deeper, something neither of them understood. A connection. Ronan exhaled sharply, rubbing his wrists. The cuffs were gone. The guards hadn't returned after Zithara left, which meant one of two things. She was keeping him alive, or she was still deciding what to do with him. The heavy doors slid open with a soft hiss. Ronan straightened as a figure stepped inside, not a guard, but an alien dressed in elaborate robes, his pale, sharp features marked by authority. He had piercing golden eyes that gleamed with silent judgment. The stranger clasped his hands behind his back. "I am Valthar, advisor to the Queen." His voice was cool, calculated. "And you, human, have caused quite the disturbance." Ronan smirked. "I seem to have that effect on people." Valthar did not smile. He stepped closer, eyes scanning Ronan as if trying to see through him. "Queen Zithara is unsettled. That is not acceptable. You are an anomaly, and anomalies must be eliminated." Ronan leaned forward slightly. "Then why am I still breathing?" Valthar's expression remained unreadable. "Because the Queen is indecisive. She is allowing emotions to cloud her logic. He paused, tilting his head. She has touched you, hasn't she? Ronan held his gaze. What? Jealous? For the first time, Velthar's composed mask cracked. His jaw tensed, but he quickly smoothed his expression. You are a fool if you think this means anything. The Queen is above you, above all. Ronan shrugged. If that's true, then why is she the one asking questions? Velthar's eyes darkened. This will not last. Without another word, he turned and left, the doors sealing behind him. Ronan sat back, exhaling. So the Queen's little connection with him wasn't going unnoticed, and it was starting to make enemies. Hours passed, maybe more. Time was impossible to track in this place. When the doors opened again, it was her. Zithara stepped inside, her presence as powerful as ever. But something was different. There was a tension in her posture, something guarded in her movements. She stopped a few feet away. Velthar spoke with you. It wasn't a question. Ronan nodded. Yeah, real warm welcome. Her gaze flickered, unreadable. He believes you should be eliminated. Ronan smirked. And you. A long silence. Then she surprised him. I do not know. Ronan's smirk faded. He had expected her to deny it, to act like she was fully in control. But instead, she admitted her uncertainty. Zithara stepped closer. The Xilari do not change. We are bound by tradition, by order. And yet this connection. She hesitated, as if saying it aloud was dangerous. It is something our kind has never experienced with another species. Ronan studied her. So what happens now? Zithara didn't answer immediately. Then, after a moment, she reached for him again. This time, she did not hesitate. Her fingers brushed against his wrist, and the reaction was instant. A warmth spread through Ronan's skin, a pulse of invisible energy wrapping around them like an unseen force. Zithara's eyes widened just slightly, but she didn't pull away. Neither did Ronan. For a long moment, they stood like that, two beings from opposite worlds, connected by something neither of them understood. Then, softly, Zithara whispered, You were never meant to be here, Ronan Voss. Ronan held her gaze. And yet, here I am. She let go. And just like that, Ronan knew everything was about to change. Zithara sat in silence, staring at her hand. Even now, she could still feel it, the strange warmth that spread through her when she touched him. It was nothing like the cold, formal gestures of her people. This was different, unpredictable, dangerous. And yet, she had done it twice. She clenched her fingers into a fist, as if trying to crush the lingering sensation. This was wrong. Humans were impulsive, reckless creatures. The Xilari had studied them for years, always seeing them as lesser beings. Yet Ronan Voss, he was not afraid of her. He did not shrink under her rule like others did. Instead, he challenged her. It was infuriating and fascinating. A quiet knock at her chamber door pulled her from her thoughts. She straightened. Enter. The doors slid open, and Velthar stepped inside. His expression was calm, but his golden eyes held sharp judgment. You visited him again, he said without greeting. Zithara's expression remained unreadable. You presume too much, Velthar. The advisor did not waver. Your absence from the court was noticed. The council is already uneasy about your fixation. He took a slow step forward. He is manipulating you. Zithara's gaze darkened. You believe I am weak. Velthar lowered his head slightly in respect. Never, my queen. But emotions are a human flaw. You must not let his influence corrupt your judgment. Zithara rose from her seat, stepping down from the elevated platform. She moved past Velthar, her tone quiet but firm. I will decide what is weakness and what is not. She walked toward the balcony, looking over her vast empire. Towers of glowing energy stretched into the endless sky, ships moving in perfect formation. The Exilari were order, structure, perfection. So why did one human make her question everything? Meanwhile, in the lower chambers, Ronan sat on the floor, leaning back against the cold wall. He had spent his entire life facing impossible odds, but this was something else. The queen of an empire was drawn to him. He had seen the conflict in her eyes. She was fighting something within herself. And if Ronan had learned anything about rulers, it was this. The greatest wars were not fought with armies, but in the mind. The doors to his chamber slid open. Ronan looked up, expecting guards. Instead, it was her. Zithara stepped inside, her movements precise, controlled. The doors sealed shut behind her. No witnesses. Ronan smirked. You really can't stay away, can you? She ignored his teasing. What did you do to me? He raised an eyebrow. Pretty sure you touched me. She took a slow step forward. No Exilari has ever reacted this way to another species. When I touch you, it is as if. She hesitated, searching for the right words. As if something awakens. Ronan studied her. And that scares you. Zithara's jaw tightened. It does not scare me. Then why are you here? Silence stretched between them. Then, for the third time, she reached for him. Ronan didn't move as her fingers brushed his forearm. A pulse of warmth surged between them, deeper than before. This time, it wasn't just a spark. It was a steady hum, as if some unseen force was binding them together. Zithara inhaled sharply but didn't pull away. Ronan's voice was softer now. Admit it, Your Majesty. You feel it too. She didn't answer, but she didn't deny it either. Instead, she held his gaze a little longer than she should have. And for the first time, Queen Zithara wondered if she was truly in control of her own fate. The air in the chamber was heavy with silence. Ronan could still feel the warmth of her touch, the strange energy that pulsed between them. It was unlike anything he had ever known. And from the way Zithara was standing there, staring at her own hand as if it had betrayed her, he knew she felt it too. But neither of them spoke of it. Not yet. She turned away, her voice steady but quieter than before. This should not be possible. Ronan leaned back against the cold wall, watching her closely. Yet here we are. You keep coming back, Your Majesty. Zithara exhaled sharply, as if frustrated by something she couldn't name. You are unlike any human I have encountered. She turned to face him again, her golden eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and control. Your kind is known for chaos, for destruction. But you, she hesitated. You are something else. Ronan smirked. I'll take that as a compliment. Her gaze didn't waver. Do not mistake my curiosity for weakness. He shrugged. Never said you were weak. He took a step closer, lowering his voice slightly. But I think you're afraid of what this means. Zithara's fingers twitched at her side, but she didn't step back. Fear is an emotion I do not entertain. Ronan studied her, then nodded slowly. All right. Then prove it. She narrowed her eyes. Prove what? That you're not afraid. He held out his hand. A challenge. Zithara stared at it. She could feel the invisible pull between them, that unspoken force growing stronger each time they touched. It was dangerous. It was forbidden. And yet she placed her hand in his. The moment their skin met, a powerful surge of energy pulsed through them, like a current awakening inside their very souls. Zithara inhaled sharply, her breath catching. It was stronger than before, deeper. Ronan felt it too. His fingers curled around hers, not to hold her captive, but simply to hold her. For the first time in her life, Zithara felt something beyond duty, beyond control. And that terrified her more than any enemy ever could. She pulled back suddenly, turning away. This is dangerous. Ronan ran a hand through his hair. No argument there. Zithara's voice was quieter now. The High Council will never allow this. If they suspect, if they even sense what is happening. She didn't finish the sentence, but Ronan already knew. He exhaled. They kill me. Zithara's fingers clenched at her sides. Yes. Ronan let the weight of that settle between them. But then, instead of fear, he grinned. Guess that means we have a problem. She turned back to him, her expression unreadable. You do not seem afraid. Ronan met her gaze. I've been in worse situations. Zithara studied him for a long moment, then did something unexpected. She stepped closer, not as a ruler, not as a queen, but as a woman standing at the edge of something unknown. You are reckless, she whispered. Ronan's smirk softened. And you're not as emotionless as you pretend to be. For once, she did not deny it. Instead, she turned sharply and strode toward the door. Just before leaving, she paused. Do not leave this chamber until I return. Ronan watched her go, something deep in his chest, telling him that whatever was happening between them was far bigger than either of them realized. And it was only just beginning. Ronan paced the length of his chamber, restless. Zithara had left hours ago. Maybe longer. It was impossible to tell time in this place, but every moment without her return made his gut twist. Something was wrong. He replayed their last conversation in his mind. The way she had touched him, willingly this time. The way her voice had softened just slightly. She was fighting a war within herself. But for the first time, he wasn't sure she wanted to win. A sudden hiss of the doors breaking the silence snapped him back to the present. But it wasn't Zithara. Two heavily armed guards stormed in, weapons aimed at him. Ronan's smirk faded. Well, this doesn't look good. One guard stepped forward. You are to be moved. Ronan crossed his arms. Moved where? The second guard stepped closer. To the execution chambers. Silence. Ronan held his ground, but his muscles tensed. I take it the Queen didn't approve this little plan. The first guard sneered. The Queen has been removed from this matter. The High Council has made their decision. Ronan's blood ran cold. Removed? What did that mean? He didn't get the chance to ask. The guard surged forward, grabbing him roughly by the arms. He resisted at first, but there were too many of them. They shoved him out of the chamber and down a long, sterile corridor. His mind raced. Had Zithara been overruled? Had she been betrayed? He didn't know, but one thing was clear. He was running out of time. Meanwhile, Zithara stood before the High Council, her face a mask of calm, even as fury burned inside her. 12 council members sat in a circle around her, their expressions cold and unreadable. At the head of the chamber stood Valthar, his golden eyes gleaming with triumph. You have been compromised, my queen, Valthar said smoothly. The human has poisoned your judgment. Zithara's hands curled into fists at her sides. You speak as if I have lost control. Valthar's lips curled into a smirk. Have you not? You defied tradition. You allowed him to live when he should have been executed. And now you protect him. He took a step closer. The council has spoken. He will be eliminated. Zithara's heart clenched, but she showed no reaction. She could not afford weakness now. She lifted her chin. And if I refuse? A murmur passed through the council. Valthar's smirk widened. Then your rule will be questioned. And if necessary, replaced. A threat. A direct one. The message was clear. Defy them, and she would lose everything. Zithara's pulse pounded in her ears. She had ruled with strength and logic her entire life. Her people feared and respected her, but now, for the first time, she was being forced to choose. Duty or Ronan? The Empire or something she could not explain. For a brief second, she hesitated, and in that moment she knew. She turned sharply. You will not touch him. Valthar's smirk disappeared. You are making a mistake. Zithara met his gaze, her voice ice cold. No, you are. Without another word, she strode from the chamber. Because if Ronan was about to die, then she would stop it. even if it meant defying the empire she had sworn to protect. Ronan gritted his teeth as the guards dragged him down another long corridor. His wrists were bound behind his back with energy restraints, pulsing with a soft blue glow. Every time he tried to move too much, the restraints tightened, sending a sharp jolt up his arms. His mind raced. Where was Zithura? Had she been forced to stand down? Had she been betrayed? The guards stopped in front of a heavy metal door. One of them pressed a panel on the wall, and the door slid open with a slow hiss. Inside was a small, dark chamber, empty except for a cold, metallic platform in the center. Ronan let out a short breath. So this is it. One of the guards shoved him forward. Kneel. Ronan didn't move. The second guard stepped forward and struck him across the face with the back of a rifle. Pain exploded through Ronan's jaw as he stumbled to one knee. He let out a small chuckle, wiping blood from his lip. You guys really don't like me, huh? Neither guard answered. Instead, they activated a control panel on the wall. A low hum filled the air, and Ronan felt the energy in the room shift. Something was coming. Then the alarms blared. The guards froze. Red warning lights flashed along the walls, and a voice echoed through the intercom. Security breach detected. Intruder approaching Sector 7. Ronan's heart leaped in his chest. Zithura. The guards turned toward the door, confusion flickering across their faces. That was all the distraction Ronan needed. In one swift movement, he lunged forward, ramming his shoulder into the closest guard. The impact sent them both crashing to the floor. Ronan twisted, using his bound hands to loop over the guard's neck and pull him into a chokehold. The second guard scrambled to aim his weapon, but before he could fire, the doors exploded. A shockwave of energy blasted through the room, sending metal shards flying. The second guard was thrown back into the wall, knocked unconscious on impact. Ronan coughed through the dust and smoke, barely able to see through the chaos. But then she stepped through. Zithura moved with lethal precision, her long coat billowing behind her. Her eyes burned with a dangerous light, and in her hand she held a glowing energy blade. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. With a single strike, she sliced through Ronan's restraints. The energy bands flickered and vanished, freeing his wrists. He flexed his hands, looking up at her with a lopsided grin. Took you long enough. Zithura ignored his teasing. We must go. Now. Ronan grabbed the fallen guard's weapon and followed her out into the corridor. The entire facility was in chaos, sirens wailing, soldiers running in all directions. But none of them were prepared for what was coming, because their own queen was now their enemy. Zithura moved like a shadow, cutting down anyone who tried to stop them. Ronan stayed close, using his stolen weapon to take out soldiers from a distance. They fought their way through the halls, one step closer to freedom. As they neared the exit, Ronan glanced at her. You really threw away your whole empire for me. Zithura didn't hesitate. I made my choice. Ronan's chest tightened at her words. She had chosen him. But the battle wasn't over yet, because as they reached the hangar bay, the doors slammed shut, and Valfar was waiting for them. The hangar bay was eerily silent. Ronan and Zithura stood side by side, weapons drawn, as the doors slid open to reveal Valfar. He stood at the center of the room, flanked by a squad of elite guards. His golden eyes gleamed with cold amusement, his hands clasped behind his back. The smugness in his expression sent a bolt of anger through Ronan's chest. So, Valfar said, his voice smooth and calm, the mighty queen betrays her own people for a mere human. Zithura didn't waver. You forced my hand. Valfar let out a soft chuckle. No, my queen, you let him poison your mind. He took a slow step forward. But it is not too late. Surrender now, and I will be merciful. The human will die, of course, but you may still rule. Ronan tightened his grip on his weapon. Wow, what a deal. Zithura ignored him. You assume I fear you, Valfar. His smirk widened, I assume you know when you are outnumbered. He raised his hand, and the guards snapped into position, weapons aimed. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, Zithera moved. She was faster than lightning, her energy blade slicing through the air. Before the first soldier could even react, she cut him down. The room exploded into chaos. Blaster fire erupted from all directions. Ronan ducked behind a cargo crate, returning fire as fast as he could. Zithera was a blur of motion, taking down enemy after enemy with deadly precision. But Velthar was waiting. Ronan caught the shift in movement too late. Velthar lunged from the shadows, his own energy blade flashing toward Zithera. She blocked just in time, their weapons colliding in a burst of white-hot sparks. "You are a fool," Velthar hissed, pushing against her blade. "You throw away your empire for what? A weak, fleeting attachment." Zithera gritted her teeth, pushing back. "This is my choice." Their weapons clashed again and again, a dance of skill and power. But Velthar was strong, too strong. He twisted suddenly, slamming his elbow into Zithera's ribs. She staggered, just for a second. And in that second, he struck. His blade sliced toward her chest. Ronan didn't think, he just moved. He threw himself between them, knocking Zithera out of the way. A sharp, searing pain tore through his side as Velthar's blade cut deep. Zithera gasped. "No." Ronan hit the ground hard, pain exploding through his body. He barely registered Zithera's cry of fury before she unleashed everything. Her blade burned brighter, faster than Ronan had ever seen. She attacked. Velthar barely had time to react before she drove her weapon straight through his chest. His eyes widened in shock. He tried to speak, but no words came. Then he collapsed. Silence fell. Zithera dropped to her knees beside Ronan, pressing her hands against his wound. Her breathing was shaky. "Stay with me," she whispered. Ronan gave a weak smirk. "Did we win?" Zithera swallowed hard. Yes. The alarms were still blaring, but it didn't matter anymore. The soldiers were either dead or had fled. The fight was over. Zithera lifted him gently. "We are leaving." Ronan chuckled weakly. Didn't think running away with a queen would be this painful. Her grip tightened. "You are not dying today." Ronan looked up at her, the pain dulling slightly. Despite everything, the battle, the betrayal, the impossible choices, she was still here. Still choosing him. He managed a small smile. "Then let's get out of here." Together, they disappeared into the night, leaving the Empire behind.